I'm coming to you tonight, as you know, from the wonderful town of Moree, up on the rich black soil of the plains in the north of New South Wales. In this part of the country, all through last year, they had a lot of trouble with closed borders, especially, of course, Anastasia Palaszczuk closing off the border between Queensland and New South Wales. People from this area often go up to Toowoomba to see medical specialists to get medical treatments. Of course, that was all closed off. So shut borders, apart from tourism and all the rest of it, really has a personal impact directly on people in this country. We don't want to see any more border closures in this country, surely. Yet every time there's a case, every time there's just one case pop up somewhere in the country, we start hearing suggestions that maybe there'll be a lockdown, maybe borders will close. To get the latest on that, let's catch up with the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, John Barilaro. Thanks for joining us, John. You know the regions well, and you know that state borders don't matter to them. You know that communities just need to be able to disregard those borders and go about their lives.
Yeah, look, good evening, Chris. And that's exactly right. Anyone that lives in a border community or close to a border, those borders are meant to be seamless. They're meant to be invisible for commerce, for health delivery, for families to get across, for tourism, for a range of reasons. And that's why those border closures really did impact on the northern part of our state. And when you talk about an area like Moree, which is an agricultural mega hub, this is an area that produces the food and fibre that we are proud of as a nation and a lot of exports. The truth is those borders have to remain open, and where the real impact it was mobility around that skilled workforce that they needed off the back of the worst drought. Here we had rain, we had a bumper season in front of us, and then we were hampered by the lack of a mobile workforce to assist those landholders and farmers.
John, you and Gladys Berejiklian have been very brave on this. You've kept borders open, except for a while Victoria had the virus out of control, but otherwise you've kept borders open. You've tried to deal with outbreaks without closing down Sydney and closing down the whole state. But how do you get the rest of the country, the other premiers, to behave like that? Because even with one case of community infection in Brisbane and one in Sydney, straight away media and politicians are asking, do we need to close borders again? I mean, that is madness, given the way we've controlled this virus in this country over the past year.
Yeah, look, Chris, it is madness, and the only time we ever closed the border was when, you know, we got to 700 cases a day in Victoria, and that was a real danger to our state. But outside of that, we've been working to the national interest. Now, Chris, let's be honest, it's worked for those states to close their borders. Anastasia Palaszczuk went to an election with a parochial approach, and that's closing borders, and she got re-elected with an increased majority. We saw what happened in Western Australia, that whole parochialism of Western Australians fighting for Western Australians, closing the borders on the rest of the country worked in that campaign. And the truth is, when there is something like a global pandemic around, there's fear and anxiety. Some leaders lead through absolutely using fear and anxiety as an opportunity and a weapon. And I think that's the problem that we've seen. But we can't afford to close borders. We now have in place vaccine rollout right across the country. Our biggest risk is quarantine, and that's why quarantine workers are being prioritised with the vaccine rollout. It is a human system. Things can go wrong, but that's the only risk we've got. And our risk, when you compare us to the rest of the world, regardless that I may agree or not agree with what's happened in other states, overall as a nation, we've done a bloody good job in managing the pandemic, now rolling out the vaccine and keeping the economy going. So, you know, we're not just a gold standard, we're a diamond standard when you compare us to the globe. But let's now start thinking of Australia first, not state by state. It's got to be what's good for the broader good of the nation.
Well, I agree with what you say, but it really worries me that we haven't learnt enough over the last year, because have a look at this. This is Mark McGowan speaking to Sky News just after he was re-elected on the weekend.
We did the right thing. We did the right thing by the state. We haven't had any community spread for more than 10 months. Lives have been saved. I just think all of this sniping and undermining and carry on about it probably needs to stop. We know that these measures work, and we know that people across the country actually respect governments that take steps to protect their citizens. So I think we did the right thing.
Yeah, so John, we know it's popular, we know it's politically popular. Mind you, no one argued against his policies in that state election. Do we need to see more from Canberra, though, to try and force some national standards? Because even with the vaccine being rolled out, all the experts tell us we will see infections, we will see small outbreaks. We've got to learn to deal with this better.
Yeah, well, that's the first message. We are going to see people get the infection. We're not going to be able to vaccine the whole country in days, weeks or months. It's going to take 9 months, 12 months to do this. So there's going to be moments where you're going to have an infection. But what we've got to understand is we've got the health system in place. We've got the protocols in place. And if you've had the vaccine once or twice, or you've gone through it, you still may get the infection, but the severity of the infection won't be the same. So the reality is it's a new norm. We can live with this, with the vaccine rollout, and we can't. We've got to stop living in fear and anxiety and get back to some level of normality. And you are right. The National Cabinet served us well at the start of the pandemic. And why? Because a lot of state governments were looking for a handout for support because of the impact we had on our sectors, our economy, by the feds. And when they were supporting states in that way, everyone was able to agree.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, John. I appreciate it. You're making a lot of sense of it. That is all the time we've got for the program tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. Deputy Premier of New South Wales, John Barilaro.